He sat alone on the front porch, morning light filtering through the trees and shining on his graying hair. In his hand was a cup of hot coffee, the steam gently fogging up his thin glasses. In front of him was a quiet garden, the grass neatly trimmed, an old wooden chair lying still beneath the oak tree. No voices, no footsteps, only a light breeze and the sound of early birds. A familiar morning, repeating every day, and he didn't want to change a thing about it. Why is it that the older a man gets, the less he wants to change his life? Maybe because he's already been through enough upheaval. There was a time when everything he thought was solid suddenly fell apart. A relationship that once seemed lasting, a home that used to be a place to return to. Even the plans he once put his trust in. After it all, he no longer believed that anything was forever, except for the peace he built for himself. At this age, there are two things. Every man wants to keep peace and his possessions. Peace doesn't mean there's no sadness, but that he no longer wants to fight, no longer seeks to win or be right. He just wants each day to pass gently, without surprises, without chaos. Possessions aren't just money. They are the house he repaired with his own hands, the savings he tucked away over the years, the independence he worked hard to protect. And more than anything, it's what keeps him from feeling like a burden to anyone. He's not intentionally shutting the world out. It's just that he's come to understand that, to have this stillness, he had to lose so much. So he's not willing to trade it away one more time. To truly understand the deeper reason behind that choice, we have to start where all hesitation begins, the past. John walked out of the courthouse on a cold afternoon, holding a stack of documents and the final ruling letter. After more than 20 years of building a home, all he had left now was a small rented apartment on the outskirts and a few boxes of personal belongings. The house once filled with children's laughter, the smell of baked cookies in the morning, and movie nights together, was no longer his. Custody of the children was no longer his either. Everything he once called family in a single day was no longer in his hands. At first, there was anger. Angry at feeling treated unfairly, angry at losing so much, while he had been the one trying to keep everything together. Then came the sense of hurt, the feeling of being pushed out of the very life he helped build. Every time the kids came to visit, he tried to act cheerful. But once the door closed, he sat in silence for hours at the dining table, where 4 people used to gather. As time passed, those initial emotions gradually turned into a thick layer of caution. John no longer wanted to share much. He no longer had interest in meeting new people. He didn't actively seek anyone out. The phrase, "I'm not afraid to love, I'm just afraid of losing everything again," became a familiar reflex whenever friends brought up the idea of opening up. Slowly, John turned into a quiet, reserved, and guarded person. John's story is not unusual. According to data from the Institute for Family and Marriage in the U.S., men over 45 are the group that suffers the greatest financial losses after divorce. Many lose a significant portion of their assets, lose stable housing, lose the right to be close to their children. But beyond the material loss, they also face long-lasting psychological shock, the feeling of being pushed out of a familiar life and no longer having a place in the home that once belonged to them. What's noteworthy is that, in the face of such losses, men don't always show it outwardly. They silently endure, maintain their pride, keep up a tough exterior. But inside, there is a very clear change. They are no longer seekers of new things. They become keepers, keeping stability, keeping their belongings, keeping their familiar routines, and keeping their distance. From someone who once built a home, they become someone who builds boundaries, not out of selfishness, but out of fear, not because they no longer need anyone, but because they're afraid that if they lose again, this time there will be nothing left to hold on to. After loss, men no longer seek too many new things. They just want to protect what's left from being taken away. 6 years since the divorce, he hadn't entered a new relationship, not because of a lack of opportunity, and not because his heart had gone cold. It was simply that he valued his current misunderstandings. Without walking into the house with a tense atmosphere waiting. The small apartment sat on the corner of an old street, but it was warm. Mornings came with the sound of birds. Evenings allowed for uninterrupted reading. Everything went his way from dinner time to how the towels were folded in the bathroom. He lived alone, and that made him feel at peace, something he never fully experienced before. Even when he had a complete home, peace after the age of 45 is no longer a vague state. It becomes a specific, clear need, defined by very practical things, not being torn by someone else's expectations, not trading silence for a relationship that may not bring understanding, not feeling like you're living with someone yet completely lost in your own home. For many men, love is not what they fear. What makes them hesitant is the disruption. It's the feeling of losing control when their mind constantly revolves around someone else's emotions. It's having to adjust schedules, habits, personal space. It's how, sometimes, a careless word during dinner can make the entire day feel heavy. At 20, they could endure those things out of the desire to be loved and the willingness to start over. But after going through enough ups and downs, a grown man starts to weigh his choices. He understands that the price of being with the wrong person could be giving up the rest of his old age, not just in material things, but in inner peace. Being alone is no longer a fear. Being alone sometimes becomes a choice, because quiet is also a form of self-love. No one interrupting, no one demanding, no one exhausting the mind with things out of your control. Of course, this peace comes with its own price, the absence of close connections, warm hugs, or simply someone to sit beside and share the silence at the end of the day. But for many, compared to what they've lost, this is still the less painful choice. And along with the inner peace, they begin to protect the outer peace too, their assets. The house he lives in isn't big, but every brick, every door, every corner is the result of years of relentless work. The small front yard, the old car that still runs well, and the savings in his bank account, all are the outcome of sacrifices, sleepless nights, and moments of endurance to keep a job, provide for the family, and stabilize life. To him, assets are not just numbers, they are symbols of effort, proof that he once made it. After the age of 45, assets for a man are no longer simply about how much money or what he owns. They represent freedom. The freedom to choose how to live. The freedom to say no to things he doesn't want. The freedom to not be controlled by anyone. Having once lost, he understands very well the feeling of being dependent, being dragged into, being caught up in obligations he couldn't control. And because of that, he starts to rebuild clear boundaries around what belongs to him. Many choose to keep the house in their own name, separate financial accounts, even openly set conditions before entering a new relationship. Some ask for prenuptial agreements. Others keep full control of their assets and are only willing to share at the minimum level. It's not because they don't know how to love. It's because they know that if they lose again, they may not have enough time to rebuild from scratch. Mark, 60 years old, is one of those men. After 2 breakups, he still keeps his optimism and openness in connecting with someone new. But in his most recent remarriage, he clearly shared with his wife that all financial matters would remain completely separate. Premarital assets, personal accounts, retirement funds, all kept individually. They could live together, share emotions, but not be bound financially. Not because he didn't trust her, but because he needed to protect what took him so long to regain. He's not stingy, he's willing to spend, willing to enjoy life's little joys with his partner. But he doesn't want to lose again. Losing assets isn't just losing money, it's losing the sense of control, losing the ability to decide for himself. And that's something, at this age, no man wants to go through a second time. From the outside, that behavior might be misunderstood as selfish, but when looked at more closely, it's a form of self-protection, not to block love, but to ensure that if love leaves, He still has himself. Protecting assets, in many cases, isn't about being unwilling to share. It's because the man has once been caught in consequences that cost him too much, not just assets, but also composure, self-respect, and trust in himself. He doesn't want that to happen again. But when focusing too much on holding on, sometimes they forget how to give. He retired early at 58, after nearly 30 years of non-stop work. On the first morning, waking up without needing to go to the office, he felt a sense of relief. No more meetings, no more urgent emails to reply to, no more ringing phones. He thought finally, this is the freedom I've been waiting for throughout my career. But then each day passed in prolonged silence. Mornings making coffee alone, afternoons watching old shows from who knows what year, evenings eating dinner alone in a clean but cold kitchen. Over time, he no longer felt the urge to talk. Phone calls with his son became short, circling around a few familiar questions. How's work? How's your daughter? And ending with, I'm fine. Nothing new. He wasn't angry with his son, but he also wasn't close. Not because his son didn't want to connect, but because every time his son reached out, he avoided it. He was afraid of being asked too much, afraid of talking about emotions, afraid of someone stepping into the life he had arranged so neatly and quietly, and so he kept his distance, quietly and intentionally. From the outside, people might think he's content, but in truth, he's lonely, a kind of loneliness without drama, without noise, but one that sinks in slowly and deeply. Lonely not because no one is around, but because there's no one to truly share with. Protecting yourself is necessary. But when the fear of being hurt becomes a wall, people unknowingly push away even those who are genuine. Not everyone who comes into your life wants to take something. Some people come just to sit beside you, to listen, to share simple but fulfilling moments. But if you don't open up, you'll never know who is truly willing to stay. The truth is, there's still a way to both protect what you cherish and not lose the chance to live fully. No one is forcing you to trade peace for a relationship, and no one says that to love. You must let go of everything you've built. What matters is knowing where the boundary is that protects you, and where the opening is that allows you to connect with others. Balance is not about giving everything away, nor about holding on to it all. It's the art of knowing what is yours and what can be shared. In a new relationship, clarity from the beginning is the foundation for building respect. Be honest that you need your own space. Be upfront about the financial boundaries you want to keep. Be truthful with yourself about how ready you are. These things don't make you hard to approach. On the contrary, they help the other person understand you better and feel safer entering the relationship. Start with small actions. Instead of long messages, set up a short meeting where both can look each other in the eye and feel the real presence. When sharing, you don't need to tell everything about the past, just enough for them to understand who you are now. Keeping a part to yourself doesn't mean hiding it, simply means respecting the process of building trust. You can still keep a separate account, still lock the door when you need a quiet evening, still say, today I want to be alone without feeling guilty. Because maturity doesn't mean shutting down. Maturity is knowing that emotions should be given selectively, and that the most precious things often take time to grow, not come from rushed sacrifice. A man who knows how to protect his values, but is also willing to step out of his comfort zone to reconnect with the world, that is a man who not only survives hardship, but lives deeply and truthfully with himself. And sometimes, one small step, if taken at the right time, can change the rest of your life. There are things that only after experiencing loss, people truly understand the real value of peace and what they own. That's why the desire to protect everything from the house, the money in the account, to the quietness in the mind is completely understandable. It's not selfishness, but the natural instinct of someone who has walked through brokenness, who has faced emptiness that no one else could fill. But sometimes, that very protection unintentionally becomes a wall that keeps others from coming in, and also keeps oneself from stepping out. Happiness doesn't just appear if we keep every door shut. Sometimes, happiness comes from something very small, a kind look, an honest question, a chance to start again, slowly but deeply. If you've ever thought that you don't need anyone anymore, maybe today is the time to revisit that thought. No one is saying you have to change completely, but if there's even a slight stir in your heart when hearing the word companionship, then maybe you're still waiting for something. Maybe it's a short meeting over the weekend, a message you still haven't sent, a sincere sharing you've kept in for too long. Try not for anyone else, but for yourself, the one who's been hurt enough to cherish peace and grown enough to know that holding on to everything alone isn't always the fullest way to live. The ending image doesn't need to be loud, just an ordinary morning. He puts on his coat, carefully locks the door behind him, but this time, in his hand is not only a key, but also a bouquet of flowers. Small, simple, but a sign that he is ready to step out of his safety, not to lose, but to gain. If you feel this video speaks a part of your story, leave a comment, and if you find it worthwhile, share it with someone like you, because a man who understands himself always has a chance to start again, in his own way.